And thank you for coming to this event. The political is personal, writing about Muslim women, a reading of Open City fellow stories. Open City is one of two online publications of the Asian American Writers Workshop. We believe that Asian American stories need to be told. This is the reason why we have launched and maintained fellowships where fellows write stories that seek to document the pulse of metropolitan Asian America as it's being lived on the streets of New York right now. For us here at the Asian American Writers Workshop, it's all about class, racial, and gender equality and social justice. In 2016, we decided to launch a new fellowship, the Muslim Communities Fellowship. The simple reason is that we are getting worried about the growing, no, actually the worsening Islamophobia in this country. Um, this was before the event in November known as the US presidential elections. And then Trump happened. And for us, that was the most, it's a singular reason why we felt we had a more urgent reason to push through and sustain this fellowship. So now we have this Muslim Communities Fellowship. And our purpose is to have a space for emerging writers who will write about Islamophobia and how it is affecting Muslim American communities and how our communities are fighting back. So the stories you're going to hear today are products of 6-month long, more or less 6 months, 6-month long fellowship of the writers that are going to read their works tonight. So let me present to you our batch of Muslim Communities Fellowship for Fall 2017. We have Humera Afridi, Sumaya Awad, Roja Heydarpour, Rad Rahman, and Sarah Khan. Unfortunately, yeah, give a hand for Sarah. Unfortunately, Sarah can't be here with us tonight, but we are going to watch the short film that she produced that was posted in Open City. Okay, to start the ball rolling, let's start with Humera Afridi, our senior fellow. Humera is of Pakistani origin. In 2017, she was awarded the New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Nonfiction Literature, the Gregory Millard Fellowship. Humera's writing has appeared in Granta, Guernica, the Journal of Postcolonial Writing, and the New York Times. She is a guest columnist at Three Quarks Daily. Her stories are included in the anthologies And the World Changed by Feminist Press in 2008 and Living Home by Oxford University Press in 2001. Humera has taught creative writing at Western Connecticut State University and at New York University, and English in Saudi Arabia, Dubai, and Texas. Humera will read an excerpt from her Open City story, A Spirited Sisterhood, Arab Women Rise, Part 4. Let's give Humera a hand.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much, Noel. And I really want to thank the Asian American Writers Workshop for the incredible opportunity of the Muslim Communities Fellowship. It's been very rewarding going out into ethnic neighborhoods and Muslim communities and writing about the stories that are so meaningful to us. I'm actually going to read 3 small vignettes, 3 sections from different sections, so I slightly changed it, sorry. The sun is high and heat rises off the pavement as Sumaya and I leave the Beit al-Maqdis Islamic Center in Bay Ridge. I marvel at the size of the mosque and its adjoining community center that impressively occupy the entire block of 6th Avenue between 62nd and 63rd Streets. Traffic roars above us on the expressway as we make our way back to the Arab American Association's office on 5th Avenue. An empty playing field carpeted with wild grass offers respite from the otherwise drab surroundings, shabby row houses, some with steel doors huddled together on either side of the street. In the 1940s, when the Battery Tunnel displaced the enclave of Little Syria in Lower Manhattan, the Syrian population moved to Bay Ridge. The descendants of those early Christian immigrants continue to live along the waterfront here. Muslim Arab migration is far more recent, and newer immigrants have settled for the most part in the working class neighborhoods around 4th and 5th Avenues. Census maps indicate Bay Ridge to be 88% white, classifying Arabs as Caucasian, but actually it is predominantly Middle Eastern and North African, and in need of services that were either removed or never delivered due to the misrepresentation of census data. In 2010, the Arab American Association of New York ran a campaign, "Check It Right, You Ain't White." The success of this effort will reflect in the 2020 census and include a box titled MENA for people of Middle Eastern and North African origin. After Trump won the election, some people in our community said they felt hopeless, like they'd built something and now it was gone, Sumaya says as we tread single file along a narrow patch of sidewalk. Some who are undocumented were really scared. We encouraged them to speak and share their stories. Why did they come to America? What are they looking for? And what do they think is going to happen next? People lost confidence and hope after Election Day. What was going to happen to their kids? Sumaya's voice ascends to a high pitch. This is really our main concern. What are we going to do? Muslim New Yorkers are feeling and experiencing anti-Muslim bigotry at unprecedented levels. Community leaders blame the heightened discrimination on policies that view Muslims through a national security lens. But even as immigrant communities combat hate speech and violence, they are simultaneously contending with palpable issues of poverty, educational barriers, and lack of health care. We are like people putting out fires with buckets. But this approach isn't working anymore because the fire is so huge. We can't just be reactionary. We need to build a firehouse, former Executive Director Linda Sarsour declared at a convening on Islamophobia in 2016. Alhamdulillah, after Trump, I realize we are actually stronger than before, exclaimed Sumaya. Our community is unified. We have joined hands. We hold each other. People come to us and say, we want to help. We don't have money to donate, but we have time. I want to say, thank you, Trump. This is the best gift. Sumaya's optimism is infectious, and I tell her so. But when I came to the United States 10 years ago, I didn't even know where to begin, she confesses. I studied English, but then what? I didn't know how to find a job. I came as a volunteer to AAWWTV, the magical place, I call it. Here I found myself. Why am I going to keep this to myself, I thought. I should help others like me. I know people new here who just don't know where to start. I support them, show them the right way, the right direction. I was in the same basket. Alhamdulillah, it's really helped them. I could say that the magical thing is, if you love something, you're going to succeed. No matter the challenges facing you, you're going to win in the end. Sumaya is overcome by a coughing spasm and we slow down. Regaining her breath, she tells me about a young woman from Virginia who called her 2 years ago. Having heard that she helped immigrant women, she was brokenhearted. Everything finished. Everything ended after 4 years of marriage. On Sumaya's suggestion, she moved to New York, was assisted in finding a job in Bay Ridge and a shared apartment. Last week, she got married. We had a small party at the association. I did the last part of my job. Sumaya throws her head back and laughs. The director of our board performed the Islamic ceremony and did the paperwork for her. I thought, yes, we did our job to the very end. This is why our community is so special. The foyer of AAWWTV is packed. People waiting for their appointments, tinkering on their cell phones. Someone is playing a Quranic recitation on speakerphone, as if it's the most natural thing in the world, a public service attunement to the divine. No one seems to mind. The melodic recitation fills the waiting room, adorned with a colorful mural made by summer camp youth, and a billboard crammed with job announcements, all in Arabic. Sumaya leads me past walls decorated with images of rallies and protests, a striking vintage photo of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, artwork and poetry by AAWWW members, an upper flight of stairs to our office directly across from the little green room we met in last week. Her colorful desk catches my eye, as does the wall around it, abundantly tacked with photos of her daughters, inspirational quotes, and memorabilia. I think I'll skip this section and move on to another. She introduces me to her friend and colleague Inas, who has a very interesting story as well. But I'm going to move on now to a later section in the story. A week later, I am back at Beit al-Maqdis Islamic Center. It's a busy morning. 4 of the 8 classrooms are in session. In a large room separated from the main communal hall, members of the Union of Arab Women and students of the advocacy program are enunciating la, no, in Arabic, in 3 different tones, ranging from low and serious to a shrill scream. A pair of instructors from the Center for Anti-Violence Education is teaching a self-defense workshop on using voice and physical techniques. I stand back and watch. Of the 30 participants, the bold and extroverted are offering full-throated shouts of, "I belong here," or "No, stop, I said stop," while the shy ones self-consciously mutter the phrases sotto voce. Outfitted in black t-shirts and pants, the instructors model the next exercise, how to respond if someone grabs the hijab. The goal is to escape, not fight. The technique involves lifting a knee up and sharply bringing the heel down on the aggressor's foot, followed by a kick to the shin or knee, depending on the severity of the threat. Do it fast and run. Next comes a move that involves striking the nose, to be used in extremely dangerous situations. Participants pair up, taking turns to swing their arms back, mimicking a backstroke. As women, we are strong here, the instructor says, patting her hips. We want to use that. 2 women in niqab, one wearing a gold puffer jacket over her abaya, stand slightly apart, watching the others practice the exercise. What if a hijab is pulled from the back? The room murmurs. A woman pulls off her flowery headscarf and tosses it to one of the instructors, while another helps her to wrap it to the accompaniment of claps and exclamations of, "Nice, nice." The instructors then role-play a scenario of a potential assault from behind and demonstrate the self-defense moves. Gone is the state demeanor of mothers and grandmothers, giggling and shouting their self-defense lines, swinging their arms and practicing leg moves. The women have transformed the room into a veritable playground. Thank you.
Thank you, Humera. Our next fellow is Sumaya Awad. Sumaya is a 23-year-old Palestinian-American writer and activist dedicated to exposing the conditions faced by immigrants and refugees in the United States. Sumaya has written and spoken widely on the Palestine and refugee solidarity movements. She has been published and interviewed in a broad range of outlets such as The Feminist Wire, Truth Out, In These Times, the Middle East Solidarity Magazine, The Huffington Post, and Salon. As a recipient of the Davis Peace Prize, Sumaya led a month-long journalism workshop in Jordan's Zaatari refugee camp, training aspiring writers displaced by the war in Syria. Sumaya grew up in Amman, Jordan, and in Iowa City, Iowa. She earned her bachelor's degree in history and religion from Williams College in 2016. During her senior year, Sumaya wrote a historical novel on the 1948 Palestinian Nakba and was awarded the Dunbar Prize in Writing. She will read from her Open City story, What It's Like to Live in the Country That's Bombing Your Own.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Noel. So I'll be reading an excerpt from a piece I wrote titled, What It's Like to Live in the Country Bombing Your Own. There are over 40 million immigrants in the United States, and about 1 million of them come from countries the United States is currently bombing. Another 12 million immigrants came from countries the US is constantly threatening or economically strangling. These facts are not alarming when you learn that currently the US has a staggering 800 military bases overseas. To put that in perspective, according to the United Nations, there are 200 recognized countries and territories in the world, enough for about 4 US military bases in each of these countries. It's surprising, yes, but when you comb through the 241 years since the foundation of the United States, it's hard to find even half a dozen consecutive years during which the US was not involved in some form of military conflict. According to the Center for Research on Globalization, the US has been at peace for only 20 years since its foundation. Pick any war in the last 200 years, and there's over a 90% chance the US was involved in it. Today, thanks to technology and the birth of drones, warfare can be more clandestine and requires fewer troops and groundwork. That's why the 3 years and counting that the US has been at war with Yemen are not at all discussed in the mainstream. The drone strikes in Yemen, which have killed tens of thousands of Yemenis and multiple US citizens and military personnel, are wreaking havoc on a small country of just over 27 million people. One Yemeni civilian dies every day because of a cholera epidemic brought on by the war, not to mention the famine that the United Nations has declared to be one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world today. Meet Bushra Fusail, a Yemeni journalist and one of many thousands of Yemenis currently residing in the US. Bushra applied for asylum here in New York when she found herself unable to return to Yemen after finishing a work project in Jordan. While in the United States, the mainstream media and politicians remain silent on a situation resulting in the death of 50,000 children, Yemenis in the US are forced to come to grips with being in a country that is systematically destroying their own. Our country is destroyed, and we want to try to be together, to be stronger. But the government is really investing in pulling people apart, keeping them from being united. Bushra describes the systematic effort to punish Yemenis for a war brought on by foreign power. When I left Yemen last, I had no idea I wasn't going to come back, she says. I didn't even say a proper goodbye. Yemen's airports were bombed and sealed shut. There was no way home for Bushra, who last saw her family more than 2 years ago. She's one of an estimated 12,000 Yemenis admitted to the US since 2015, after an intense vetting process and various restrictions and check-ins. 12,000 is an embarrassingly low number, considering the vast resources the US state has at its disposal, and the fact that it's responsible for much of the war in the first place. Yemenis like Bushra, who sought asylum in the US, face tremendous difficulties. They are vetted and constantly threatened with fear of removal, and forced to reconcile this by pledging their loyalty and appreciation to the US for accepting them, but then denying their brothers, sisters, mothers, and even children the chance to escape war and seek refuge. We never imagined this would happen to our country, Bushra explains. We wanted to leave the country because the only other place to go is the desert, but even there, they would follow us with their airstrikes. Everyone wants their family to be united and to be safe, and they, of course, have the right to ask for that. She says, children have been separated from their parents not only as a result of war, but as a result of the draconian immigration restrictions and unnecessary regulations imposed by the government. Laws that can be easily lifted or changed to allow families to reunite, to allow a child to live in peace with his mother. Instead, the United States has chosen to further entrench Yemenis in the whirlwinds of the immigration system by issuing a travel ban 3 times, a ban that directly affects the Yemeni population. All 3 iterations of the ban bar Yemeni nationals from entering the US, no matter what immigration visa they are able to get. Bushra, who hasn't seen her family in almost 2 years, is one of the thousands of people with families still in Yemen who are forced to live with the daily fear that they may never reunite. For Bushra, this fear became a reality when her father was hospitalized from a heart attack. He was so healthy, she explains. He just had a small heart attack and died because they didn't have medication because of the siege. It's a simple form of medication, and he died because they couldn't have access to it. That's what people are dealing with. Her father passed away in the hospital because a US-backed Saudi embargo on Yemen prevented urgent heart medication from reaching him. In February of last year, people in New York rose up to resist the siege on Yemen and the Muslim ban in what became known as the airport protests. Hundreds of Yemenis in New York City participated in a day-long bodega strike, closing down their stores and rallying in Brooklyn for a speak out followed by a public prayer. It was an inspiring and breathtaking action that brought together many different parts of the Arab and Muslim community, as well as their allies in the city. This action transformed airports and their alienating atmosphere into spaces occupied by and filled with people's exuberant calls for freedom and justice. What happened in Yemen is dependent on many geopolitical factors, but actions like the bodega strike and the airport protests against the Muslim ban are critical because they place pressure on those in power. There's a lot that the average American can do to help the Yemenis living here in New York and abroad. Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it, Bushra urges me. Talk about it with people, with your representative, with your neighbors, with your coworkers. When I came here, no one knew what the hell was going on in Yemen, she says. And yet, the US was wholly involved in the war. There's a kid dying every day. It's your government, it's your country. We need to talk about it so people know what their country is doing. Bushra is right. Talking about it is key. And organizing against racist policies such as the Muslim ban is a large part of getting the word out about why Yemeni people are fleeing the country in the first place. It is imperative that we highlight the voices of people living in one of the wealthiest countries on the planet, and yet who find themselves constantly thrown into chaos and uncertainty. These people, whose countries and families are bombed to smithereens by none other than the powerful and wealthy country, the so-called beacon of democracy. But it's also important to remember that direct military intervention is just one small part of the overall US strategy overseas. The US exports arms and military technologies so that other warring nations can make use of this empire's expertise. While protesting in Ferguson, Missouri, after the police killing of Michael Brown, protesters noticed the tear gas being hurled at them often had instructions written in 4 different languages: English, Hebrew, Arabic, and Spanish. These same canisters were used against people protesting state brutality in Egypt, Palestine, and Mexico. And where was the factory that produced these canisters located? Jamestown, Pennsylvania. How fitting that the war on civilians is manufactured in one of the 13 colonies, the heart of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumaya. Roja Heydarpour was born in Iran and raised in New York City. She has worked for the Daily Beast, the New York Times, Al Monitor, Columbia Global Reports, the DevEx, among others. She teaches citizenship classes at various branches of the Brooklyn Public Library. Ladies and gentlemen, Roja.
So maybe we can bring that down. All right. Hi. Okay. So this one is called Starting from Scratch, or When Men and Women Switch Roles. So first went the mustache. He didn't tell anyone he was going to do it, and none of us had ever known him without it. So when we walked into the living room of our 2nd Avenue apartment in New York City, we slid from shock to horror to uncontrollable laughter in a matter of seconds. After decades of a thick Middle Eastern man mustache, his upper lip, for a brief moment, looked long and turtle-like. Then the gray hair disappeared, with the help of a bottle of cheap store-bought black dye. He went gray in his early 20s, so none of us had ever known him as anything but salt and pepper. That silver plastic bottle sat in our bathroom for months as his hair went from a deep black not found in nature to a burnt brass at the roots. The final phase of the transformation was the name, Hossein. Maybe that's why he couldn't find a job here in America. It's just too Muslim, even though we are decidedly secular. After much consideration, my parents finally settled on a new name, Hanson. But the night before the official change, Bubba threw up. He vomited in the same bathroom where that silver plastic bottle of dye lived. Stern, strict, dignified, the definition of traditional masculinity on the surface, these were all very shocking moves on the part of my father. Moves that inspired unidentifiable emotions in me as a girl, but now as I approach the age he was when he underwent this slow metamorphosis, they look increasingly like displacement with a dash of desperation. He spent year after year hunched over a textbook, 9 to be exact. Sometimes it was at a table, but more often than not, he sat with his legs outstretched on the bed with a pillow on his lap that doubled as a plush desk. A small lamp stayed on morning, noon, and night because for some of those years, his room was actually a hallway that connected to other bedrooms. There was no natural light. Hour after hour, day after day, life moved on, and my sister and I went from being children to teenagers, and Baba remained with his legs outstretched, underlining pages in a book. Was he actually studying that entire time? I never assumed anything but until higher education granted me a glimpse into what copious hours of studying actually entails, namely a lot of procrastination in any form possible. He was a pediatrician in Iran before we moved in '85. At first, our family was in Tehran, but for the 2 years before we abruptly left, he was a physician in his hometown in the north. The Islamic Revolution had already changed everything in '79, but it was compounded by a brutal war between Iran and Iraq that started shortly thereafter. We had a nice setup in the north and even had visitors escaping Iraqi fire that rained from the sky in Tehran. My cousin lived next door, and I always had a playmate, so life was good. At that time, the US granted very few tourist visas to Iranians. If you were young and may have harbored a desire to stay in the land of the free, you didn't have a chance. If you were a family of 4, you really didn't stand a chance. Who in their right mind would return to the Islamic Republic in the middle of a war? But in the summer of '85, we went to visit my aunt in London, and my parents took a stab in the dark. Maybe we could visit uncles in New York and Dallas. So they headed to the embassy, and much to their surprise, we got a visa. My sister, mother, father, and I headed to New York soon after, and after that to Dallas. The way they tell it, they had every intention to return. Yes, things were beyond shaky in Iran, but we were okay. Once in Dallas, the adults conversed late into the night over tea. During one of those conversations, the idea of staying emerged. Suppose we could stay, technically. Not legally, but technically it was possible. My mom had towed the line of political dissidents while back in Iran, and many of her family members were high-profile activists who had been jailed or worse. She had been questioned once before, and that was enough to shake everyone up. So when the proposition rose to the surface, it couldn't be ignored. Baba, being a man of respect, deferred to my grandfather, my mother's father. He said, if he says we should stay, then we'll stay. Later, he confessed that he never thought my grandfather would vote stay, but he did. My mother spoke English, my father did not. And so it began. At the age of 39, and not a 2017 39 where extended youth is socially acceptable, the doctor shed everything. The house, the clothes, the photos, the trinkets, the friends, the career, the license to practice medicine, the societal respect. And whether they understood the true long-term consequences of the decision at the time or not, the paradigm shifted. Baba briefly worked as a busboy in my uncle's restaurant in Texas while Mama was a cashier. Already, my mother's professional move was mostly lateral. My father's was a steep downward slope. The restaurant days didn't last long. We moved up to New York by '88, and it was a city that was more reflective of Tehran, a city that was also more welcoming to immigrants. As luck had it, the Iran-Contra scandal broke while we were still learning English in Dallas. So Oliver North's puppy dog face act was on the TV all day long. That didn't help with the assimilation process. In fact, my sister only admitted later how difficult school was for her and how even though she didn't want Baba to know, she preferred to walk to the school bus herself so that the children wouldn't make fun of that mustache. Back in New York, somewhere along the lines, my parents decided that Baba should focus on studying. She went to work at a real estate firm, and he studied. That firm soon closed, which turned out to be another major turning point in this paradigm shift that they had set loose a few years earlier. While looking for new work, the idea of group family daycare made its way to the table, and a light bulb went off. Why take care of other people's children in their homes when they can come to our home? And so the family business began, and it continues to this day. Yes, so we were undocumented immigrants. Father had no license. Mother starts a business that pays the rent, takes care of us all. Who would have thought these gender roles would have reversed so completely and for so long? They only began to even out about 10 years after the initial move. We were never the kind of family that lived according to traditional gender roles. My parents came from a revolutionary, leftist, exciting time, just like the hippies in the US, maybe with just a little less free love. Don't judge from the heights of where a person soars, but the depths from which they came. Isn't that a Christian saying I learned along the way? They were equal partners from the beginning. That said, they were equal partners in a time and place where the idea was still fairly new and slightly radical. And no matter what balance the two negotiated between one another, it is undeniable that society at large bestowed respect and privilege on my father simply because he was a man. This privilege was never afforded to my mother, which may be why she was able to adapt more easily once we shifted worlds. She made the money, she took care of the bills, he made our lunches and brought us water in the middle of the night. What does that do to a man? What does that do to a woman? Even the most enlightened among us, whether American Christian or secular Iranian or Arab Muslim. For starters, it makes him grumpy. He always had a short fuse. Everyone who loved him knew it, but everyone also knew that under that tempestuous, easily ignited veneer was a very concerned, thoughtful, generous man. Those are not attributes that a man is supposed to exhibit, though, right? Even if there is sensitivity inside the shell, it must never ooze out, except maybe at a tequila-driven holiday every once in a while. For all the progress my father made as an enlightened man who came from a small town, from a religious and strict household, he could never completely shed the toughness. That would just be crazy, and probably elicit the same reaction as when he shaved his mustache for the first time. He was settled, she was flexible, and those differences became stark when we overstayed our welcome in the U.S. Many moons later, my father and I graduated in the same year, me from high school, him from his residency, his second in a lifetime. From there, we watched him make up for lost time. Pushing 50 years old, he started to do overnight shifts in far-flung hospitals in Brooklyn and Queens until he eventually landed a full-time gig at a clinic. He kept hours that would make the most youthful of us drop to our knees. He made it. He is a man in the eyes of society now. But in my eyes, as a girl, and especially now as a woman, he was always the definition of a man. While we watch this society that we have adopted slowly cannibalize itself, led by the macho ideals of men who think they know what manhood is, it becomes increasingly clear that his story and the stories of immigrant men across the country is the more accurate model. It's a person who sacrifices and exhibits perseverance and tenacity with no outward reward in sight. Is manhood about taking all the power or giving it up? Does it take more strength to wield power or to surrender it? In that case, what's womanhood? Is it taking power without letting anyone know you have it? Is it gently filling the gaps that traditional notions of manhood gloss over? These are the questions that still linger. Leaving Iran, living in Texas, settling in New York, these circumstances force us, or at least me, to examine relationships and gender roles I would not otherwise have scrutinized. Had we stayed in Iran, I probably would be a doctor, as would my dad. My sister would likely be one too. Imagining my mother's life would be more difficult. There's no doubt she would find her way, though. Here in New York, she's still chugging along, plotting for their retirement, albeit delayed, which, as it turns out, keeps them young.
Thank you, Roja. Next up is Rad Rahman. Rad is a New York City-based Bangladeshi writer, freedom of speech advocate, and child rights specialist. She has worked with global humanitarian organizations like UNICEF and the International Center for Transitional Justice across Europe, North America, the Caribbean, and South Asia. She tweets at Rad_Rahman. She will read from her soon-to-be posted personal essay, America Made Me Muslim.
So I'm not reading from this, so don't look at that. This past summer, a white woman on an Upper West Side bodega stared at me and said, "You must be very rich to buy toilet paper from an upscale bodega." She suggested that I go to the Rite Aid nearby to buy toilet paper and paper towels, but then she looked down at my sweatshirt and flip-flops, and she hastened to add, "Or your employer must be very rich, must be the person you take care of." Just moments earlier, she had loudly asserted that the two white children in front of her in the line, who were there with the Latina babysitter, were ill-mannered, and she would, quote-unquote, never trust a Hispanic with my own children. I refused to engage with the condescending comments, but I left the store wondering how such microaggressions come to be normalized. As someone who has her A game on most of the time per being dressed up, this inappropriate lack of filters on the day that I was not was unappreciated, but it has not been uncommon. My identity has become the site of negotiating my acceptance into America. And as such, I have been made to fill out forms that say I'm Muslim at hospitals or even when I'm applying for the New York City ID. Once innocuous applications have now become extremely politicized sites that could be used to track my presence in this country. For me, the air in the States has stifled over the past year in ways that have nothing to do with extreme frost that descended after the December 2017 New York City failed terror attack, when someone from my country of birth, Bangladesh, tried to set off a homemade bomb in Port Authority. A couple of weeks after my run-in with the racist woman on the Upper East Side, it was Eid, Upper West Side, sorry. It was Eid, the largest Muslim holiday of the year. I stopped to pick up wine in Hell's Kitchen for a party I was attending in Queens that night. A skinhead couple from the Midwest stood by me at the intersection of 57th and 9th. I was dressed in a traditional South Asian salwar kameez, having just dropped off a dysfunctional tea kettle. There were clouds out, but it had not rained that day. My outfit was white, demure, with faint gold thread patterns woven in. The couple glared at my full-on Desi Eid garb, and then one of them hissed at me to go home. I turned around, smiled, and said salam and Eid Mubarak to them, before pointing to the police officer on the other side of 57th Street, and added, New York is not the place to hate Muslims. Say anything more and I will scream for help. In 2016, I entered an unraveling country whose rising far-right rhetoric mirrored the extremism towards annihilating diversity that I had been forced to flee. The rising furor of intolerance in South Asia was one I had hoped to leave behind. And in New York, I wished to find a safe space in a diversity that would allow me to continue addressing topics ranging from comprehensive education to promoting children's rights and LGBT expression. Yet, especially in conversations with strangers, I have increasingly found myself reduced to my name, race, or religion as the most crucial markers of my identity. The systematic unraveling, indeed gaslighting of the American public by the current federal government has unleashed white hate crime and hate speech that hitherto seemed impossible in the United States. According to the New York Times, the Southern Poverty Law Center counted nearly 900 instances of hate and bias in the first 10 days after the election, using news reports and witness testimonies to arrive at this number. The SPLC's tally was 1,094 hate crimes in the first month after the election, and 1,863 between November 9 and March 31st of last year. Since 2016, I have been subjected to psychotic meltdowns and brutish overtures on social media with increasing fervor. What began in the summer of 2016 with declarations of "don't worry, I won't deport you," from strangers on Facebook when I suggested that gentrification can be a good thing for New Orleans, soon escalated to a new roommate standing outside my door at 3:30 a.m., drunk out of her mind, telling me, "You don't belong here. You're not American." Even liberal groups like Gypsy Housing, that services rooming solutions for the arts community in New York, saw a spike in anti-Islamic posts hidden under the guise of free speech acts. Being attacked for my Muslim name is an act of heinous reductionism that is inexcusable. I had barely left Bangladesh and found I had entered a new zone of Islamophobia. As had been the case at home, liberal and secular Muslims like myself were the main targets. Islamophobia has become hegemonic across the US political system, particularly since Donald Trump asked for and received a Muslim ban. White supremacists such as Jeremy Joseph Christian, who shouted "get out of my country" and other Muslim slurs at two teens in a Portland subway this past summer, had publicly used Nazi paraphernalia to support his beliefs. When two men, and I'm going to mispronounce his name, Talisin Mirdin Namkai Meche and Ricky John Best, intervened after Christian harassed two girls in a subway, both men were murdered by the self-righteous professed Nazi supremacist. Trump did not even bother to berate the attack from his personal real Donald Trump account, choosing to do so from his less frequented POTUS Twitter account after being pressurized to comment on the attacks at all. Freely speaking with anti-Muslim sentiment has abusive repercussions that reverberate and percolate long after the hate speech acts are completed. President Trump was loath to call the right-wing terrorism in Charlottesville as such, however, when a car ran over pedestrian protesters, murdering one and injuring 19. The hypocrisy is apparent when looking at the New York City terror attacks. Just like Trump's reaction to the Spanish terror attack this summer, swift and draconian xenophobia towards Muslims followed, even while he legitimized racists in Charlottesville. This is what Trump said. Well, I think the driver of the seat of the car is a disgrace to himself, his family, and this country, and that you can call it terrorism, you can call it murder, you can call it whatever you want. Trump replied to a reporter who questioned him about Charlottesville. While the Trump White House regularly churns rhetoric that vilifies Muslims, what chilled me most about Trump's tweet after the attacks in Spain is the distinction he makes along religious binaries about who gets deemed a terrorist. He tweeted, "Study what General Pershing of the United States did to terrorists when caught. There was no more radical Islamic terror for 35 years. Philippines-based General Pershing is a figure whose legacy of a bloodbath against Muslim insurgents is unverified, but whose life Trump liberally embellished in a rally on his campaign trail and even as late as this summer. He said that Trump said that Pershing killed Filipino Muslim rebels by dipping bullets in pig's blood in the 19th century and spared one rebel to act as a messenger and tell families about Pershing's mercy." This is unsubstantiated, of course, as is everything by Trump. The tweet aimed to rouse anger in Trump's voter base towards the United States, 3.5 million Muslims, who have been touted as the country's least desirable immigrants ever since he decided to run for election. In this one tweet, however, he identifies Islamic terror as A, predating modern times, and then B, suggesting that all Muslims are terrorists by insinuating radical terror as quote-unquote Islamic, and finally C, by implying terror within Islam as inherently permissible within our religion. He's invoking ideas that are falsifiable and totalizes vengeance as endemic to something Muslims want. In conflating between Islam and terrorism, Trump is not alone, for Western media has forcefully tried to marry Islam with terrorism post 9/11, when problematic words such as Islamism, Islamist, and Muslim terror became the lingua franca of counterterrorism practitioners and media pundits. These terms, once nebulous, have become solidified as part of a Western lexicon that internalizes Islam as inseparable from terrorism and have become the emblematic markers of how my religion has been identified by Western media in the wake of the twin terror attacks. Of course, it's Muslims like me who have to pay the price. I'll stop here.
Thanks, Rad. Okay, last but not least is our fellow Sarah Khan. Sarah writes and creates multimedia content on food and culture. Her research has taken her to live with Bedouins in Palestine, document the plight of Indian women farmers, traverse the world of Queens, New York, and film women and food in Fez, Morocco. She holds a bachelor's degree in Middle Eastern history, master's degrees in public health and in nutrition, and a PhD in plant sciences. You can follow her on Twitter at Sarah K. Khan, on Instagram at Sarah K. Khan, and on her website, sarahkkhan.com. We're going to show you her short film that she did for Open City. It's called Collateral Damage, Surviving Surveillance Catering to America. This film was shown last year at the Museum of the Moving Image.
सुनहरे ख्वाब जो इंसान देखता है अमेरिका में आके, ड्रीम वो नहीं है यहाँ पे हमारे जैसे इमिग्रेंट लोगों के लिए। और जो यहाँ पे लोग समझते हैं दरख्तों पे डॉलर लगे हैं, वो ये नहीं है। यहाँ हर तरह से स्ट्रगल करते हैं अपने पेट के लिए, अपने बच्चों के लिए, चाहे वो खाना पकाने का हो जिस तरह मैंने किया, चाहे वो बर्तन साफ करने का हो, चाहे टैक्सी चलाने का हो, चाहे सफाई का काम हो, चाहे बाथरूम साफ करने का हो। इस मुल्क में सब करते हैं, अपने मुल्क में जो है ये काम ये लोग नहीं करते।
Shahina Parveen's son, Matin, was surveyed, entrapped, detained, and ultimately imprisoned. Already under duress to make ends meet, Shahina took up catering to supplement the family income.
मेरा बेटा 2004 में अरेस्ट हुआ था और फिर मैंने सोचा कि मैं जो है घर में खाना पकाऊं, तो मैं कैटरिंग का काम भी करना शुरू किया और सब कुछ करना हमारे लिए बहुत मुश्किल हो गया था। गुजारा तो पहले से ही मुश्किल था और ये चीज़ें और ज़्यादा मुश्किल में पड़ गई।
After being detained for over 2 years, Matin was sentenced in January 2007. On the same day, the NYPD detained Shahina and her family. 11 days later, they released Shahina and her daughter. Her husband remained in detention for 6 more months.
बर्फ में अकेला छोड़ दिया, मेरा बैंक सीज करके, मेरे पास पैसे नहीं थे, उन्होंने मेरा रेंट भरने के लिए मेरे रेंट के पैसे थे। तो ऐसे ऐसे हालात देखे, मगर मैंने काम किया, कोशिश मैंने बहुत की, अभी तक कर रही हूँ। जो बनेगा मैं करती रहूँगी, हिम्मत नहीं हारूंगी जब तक हिम्मत है। हिम्मत मर्दा मदद खुदा। एक बार मैंने किसी को, मेरी फैमिली के किसी मेंबर को मैंने कहा कि मैंने इस तकलीफ़ के वक्त में ना, तो मैं मिठाइयाँ वगैरह बनाती हूँ, मैं ये वाला काम करती हूँ घर में। आपको पता है उनको ये चीज़ बहुत बुरी लगी थी। उनको ये नहीं पता कि यहाँ जो है इतनी जल्दी से जो है हम लोगों को जॉबें नहीं मिलती और उम्र भी तो होती है हमारी, मगर वो ये चीज़ें नहीं सोचते। वो कहते अरे ये तो खाना बना रही है, ये तो टिफ़िन बना रही है, ये तो ये कर रही है, तो वो कर रही है। इस तरह की बातें बनाते हैं, तो ये बातें दुख देती हैं। ये मगर मैं दुखी नहीं हूँ। मैं क्यों दुखी हूँ? ना मैं बेशर्म हूँ, ना कुछ हूँ। क्यों? मैं तो अपना बना के खिला रही हूँ अपने बच्चों को। अपनी स्ट्रगल को मैं कर रही हूँ, मैं पूरा करने की कोशिश कर रही हूँ। तो मैं कामयाब हुई हूँ इसमें, ऐसा नहीं कि नहीं हुई हूँ। आज जो ये वक्त आहिस्ता आहिस्ता जो बदल रहा है ना, आखिर एक दिन मुझे यकीन है कि ये वक्त बदलेगा और अच्छे दिन आएंगे।
Matin's sentence is for 30 years. Shahina describes the ritual of going to see him in prison.
यहाँ से हम लोग रात को इतनी सवेरे 3 बजे उठते हैं, तैयार वैयार होके नाश्ता थोड़ा बहुत करके जाते हैं, तो फिर हम 5 बजे वहाँ खड़े हो जाते हैं। ये सबवे है ना बड़ा यहाँ पे, वहाँ एक वैगन आती है, तो फिर हम वैगन में जाते हैं। शुक्र है कि अल्लाह ताला ने एक बंदोबस्त करके रखा, वरना मैं अपने बेटे को कैसे देखती। समझाया? बहुत पैसे लगते हैं और इतनी गुंजाइश नहीं मेरे पास बच्चे के पास जाने के लिए, तो ये गुंजाइश है तो फिर मैं करती हूँ। इसमें मेरे ड्रम ने भी बहुत मदद की है, बहुत मरतबा ले गए हैं, बहुत मरतबा पैसों की भी हेल्प की है, बहुत मरतबा मैं खुद करती हूँ। बच्चे के पास तो जाना है, मगर शुक्र है अब मैं देख सकती हूँ महीने में 1 बार, कभी कभी 2 मरतबा। और मैं बहुत एक्साइटेड होती हूँ, मैं बहुत खुश होती हूँ। ऐसा लगता है कि मतीन के पास बैठूँ, मैं वापस ना उसी के पास रह जाऊँ, मैं इसको अकेला नहीं छोड़ूँ। पता नहीं क्या क्या ख्यालात आते रहते हैं। वो सारे रास्ते दुआएं मांगती जाती हूँ, सारे रास्ते अल्लाह के हवाले करती वापस आती हूँ। उधर भी बैठे बैठे रोती हूँ अंदर अंदर से, मगर बेटे के सामने नहीं रोती हूँ, उसको हिम्मत देती हूँ। और वो भी बेचारा ऐसा ही है, मेरा बेटा है ना, माँ बाप को बहुत केयर करता है और कहता है मैं तुझे देखता हूँ ना माँ, तो तुझे देखने से मुझे झलक मिल जाएगी, तो मैं तुझे गौर से देख रहा हूँ, प्यार से देख रहा हूँ मामा, प्यार से देख रहा हूँ। इस तरह करता है वो। मैं थक गया हूँ, मुझे घर आना है, मैंने कुछ नहीं किया, इन लोगों ने मुझे फंसाया है, वो पता नहीं क्या क्या चीज़ें कहता रहता है। तब मैं अंदर अंदर से ना बहुत तकलीफ़ में होती हूँ। तो मैंने कहा बेटा जो तकलीफ तू अंदर देख रहा है वही तकलीफ तू तो जेल के अंदर है, मैं तो बाहर होते हुए भी जेल में हूँ, अकेली हूँ जिस तरह तू अकेला है, कोई नहीं है मेरे पास, और मैं माँ हूँ, तुझे पेट में रखा है ना, तो अभी अगर अल्लाह ताला ने मुझे ऐसा बनाया होता, इतने बड़े को अंदर डाल के यहाँ से ले जाती, मैं तुझे तकलीफ में नहीं छोड़ती कभी भी। क्या करूँ, अभी मैं कुछ नहीं कर सकती हूँ, मैंने तो अभी तक किया, अभी भी जो कर रही हूँ उम्मीद पे कर रही हूँ, अल्लाह करेगा अच्छा होएगा, उसको हिम्मत देती हूँ। अपनी खुशी अपना गम सब अपने ऊपर ही है, अपने साथ साथ है, अपने बच्चों के साथ है, अपने शोर के साथ है, हम एक दूसरे को ना हिम्मत देते हैं, इसीलिए अभी तक जो है ना खड़े हैं। मेरे हस्बैंड तो वैसे तो क्वाइट ही हैं, बहुत समझदार, नेक, ज़्यादा बोलने वाले नहीं हैं, मगर बच्चे को जो हमारे ले लिया, हमारे पर इतना जुल्म हुआ, तो ये उसको दुनिया ने बिल्कुल क्वाइट ही कर दिया, बिल्कुल खामोश, कोई नहीं है इसके साथ बात करने वाला। हम अपने बेटे से जब भी जाते हैं विजिट के लिए, वो अपने बेटे के साथ बात करता है, बेटी के साथ करता है, इन बेटी और ये हमारी एक छोटी सी दुनिया, इसके अलावा कोई नहीं।
The damage to the family members is profound. The damage to the larger community is profound too. Sheena reflects on how other mothers of detained and imprisoned suffer.
बहुत सारी माएँ जो है ना बाहर नहीं निकलती, बोलती भी कुछ नहीं है, बहुत डरती हैं, अपनी औलाद के लिए क्यों डरना, सच के लिए क्यों डरना। जब ये लोग यहाँ आए थे, पहले से यहाँ आबादी थी, वो नेटिव अमेरिकन है, वो भी इन तकलीफ़ों से गुजरे हैं और अभी भी वो इन तकलीफ़ों में हैं, जो तकलीफ़ में इस वक्त काट रही है, जो ब्लैक कम्युनिटी काट रही है, ये मैंने देखा है, वरना इस तरह से इतनी तकलीफ़ हमारे मुसलमान लोगों को नहीं होती, इतने सारे लोग ये जंगों में मर गए हैं, इस तरह से नहीं होता, इतने सारे लोग अपनी कंट्रियाँ छोड़ के बच्चों के साथ दरबदर होकर दूसरी कंट्रियों में नहीं जाते, आप लोगों को तंग नहीं करते, मजबूरी की वजह से बच्चों के रोज़ी रोटी के लिए, बेहतर मुस्तकबिल के लिए, अपनी जान बचाने के लिए, सेफ्टी के लिए यहाँ आए।
The collateral damage wrought upon her, the family, and the community is everlasting. In fact, there's no such thing as collateral damage. It's damage. And it's intended and perceived as legitimate. This is her story of her daily persistence and survival.
Maybe may I call on all the fellows to come on stage for a short conversation? Hi, fellows. Those are really, really powerful and compelling stories that you shared with us tonight. Thank you for sharing them tonight. I have a question for you. How did your experiences in your personal lives help you in your reporting the Muslim communities? How do you create a balance between the personal and the political in your writing? The stories that you presented.
Okay, I guess I'll take it. So mine was, is that working? Yeah. Mine was obviously a very personal and not reported piece. It was the first time I've ever written personal essays. And really, this space kind of just allowed me to do it. I had pitched 3 stories to when I applied for the fellowship, And as we started, I realized that those were really my own stories, and I was just trying to find other people to tell them. And so I just thought maybe this is the clearest, most poignant way I can do it.
I think the two parts to your question. The first part, I think you said, how did the personal help us to
Yes, your
actually go and
personal-
report on
your
the
personal
story?
experience, yes.
You know, it's really in retrospect. I was thinking about it as I was preparing sections to read for this event, that why was I didn't intend to write a 4-part series on Bay Ridge, but that's what happened. I ended up writing a 44-page story. And I kept going back. I went to meet Sumaya, and she'd say, you know, tomorrow we are having a language lesson, or the day after we're having our first ACS workshop. Would you like to come? And each time I'd go, and it was as if there was something incredibly magnetic about the space, the sisterhood, the community. It was very nurturing. And though I was on the outside observing, reporting, it was having an effect on me. And I realized actually that what I was going back for was something I didn't have when I came here as an immigrant, because I actually didn't come here as an immigrant. I came as an international student, and very abruptly got married, entered into a marriage as a student, and overnight I went from international student to wife of an immigrant, is how I thought of myself, you know. And so I think, and I didn't have that community. I didn't have, my parents had not immigrated. There was none of that. So I think I was just really enjoying this process of seeing how a community supports itself, how the women were coming together.
The article that I reported, that I read out from was not a report. It was very personal, and I think, like Humera just said, the Asian American Writers Workshop really does provide a space that allows you to think about your personal story as something that is worth sharing. And actually, as a writer and as a reporter, that's something that, for me, came out of the blue because I survived a terror attack in Bangladesh when my best friend was murdered by Al Qaeda for starting the country's LGBT magazine, only LGBT magazine, and I never actually thought that my story was one that needed to be told until it reached that kind of proportion, like where you can't hide anymore, because if you do, then that story is never going to get told. So I think that's where, for me, like, it's always been like an interesting balance between reporting and realizing that I kind of became the story as a result of terrorist actions.
I think there are two things I want to say in response to this question. I think in terms of why I think this fellowship was so important, what made me interested in it, has to do with the fact that, so I went to Williams College, which is a predominantly white college with very few international students. There was always this like light shown on like the Muslim kid or the the Palestinian kid, and it was like they were responsible to answer like all the questions, and their experience was the experience, right? Like there's no, it's not dynamic, like there's nothing else, there's no diversity. And I think out of that, coming out of that, what I did at AAWW was I ended up writing like a 3-part series on the complex forms of oppression that Muslim women face, and especially after the Trump era. And what's so important about that, and I think this ties into bringing the personal and political, and the fact that there really isn't a difference between the two at all. We're told there's a difference, right? Like that's imposed on us, but the reality is there isn't. And in my stories, the one I read aloud was about Yemen, but there's another one about like a black Muslim woman who's a DACA recipient, or about the types of things that Muslim women in Bay Ridge have faced, surveillance over the years and things like that. It's just how many forms of oppression Muslims and women face, and how they're all intersectional. And I think that we're seeing that a lot more under Trump, because suddenly he's attacking everyone. So, if you're a Muslim, if you're a black or brown person, if you're a woman, we're seeing that now with the Me Too movement. And I think building on these intersectionalities and highlighting them is so important.
Okay. So, do you have any advice for writers who would wish to write about the Muslim American communities, and in particular those who are wanting to write about Muslim women in America? Any advice?
I don't know if I have advice, but oh, okay. I wouldn't purport to be able to give advice since I pretty much finally just started to write the way I want to after like 15 years myself. But I guess if you're writing a personal story, you just have to be as honest as you possibly can be. Otherwise, it's not worth it. And if you're trying to cover other communities, really listen and don't impose any of your preconceived notions on them, whether it's liberal or far right or middle or anything. You really just have to listen when you go into communities and just shed everything else.
Okay. Hold on. How did your experience as fellows with the Asian American Writers Workshop help shape the way you write, the way you wrote the stories? Was there, was it a factor? Did it make a difference?
Huge.
Um, it was really a wonderful freedom that I felt I had reporting on Bay Ridge to the extent that I did, because I don't know where else I could have continued going back and saying, I want to write more on the same story, I want to write more on the same story. And I was allowed to write and keep going back and not just have a little short vignette or a sound bite and a quote and that was it. I really got to know the people that I was speaking with, got to know about their lives, and so it wasn't just a surface story, but I was going in deep and going into people's hearts, and that connection mattered, and it really feels needed and urgent at a time right now where we are going through what we are politically.
Well, I never thought I would be spending so much time stalking the hallways of Bellevue Hospital when I started one of the pieces that I was working on, which documents what it means to be a survivor of torture and go through the Survivors of Torture program at Bellevue Hospital. I guess, in terms of advice, I would just say be honest, as Roja also said, but in general, I think the workshop was really, really amazing in terms of just being no, keep going. You're on the right path, and this story needs to be told. And I've been reporting about other people for a while now, so it was interesting to have, and important, I think, for me as a writer to grow, to have a space where I could just kind of go through the motions of what it means to be in this country, in this political moment.
I'm going to try to answer both those questions. To the second one, I think one of the really great things about this fellowship, aside from just having a group of people that you can bounce your ideas off of, and people coming from very different experiences, was just invaluable. But I think that one thing that's so great about this fellowship is that it's like the opposite of mainstream news, and I guess what I mean by that, and this ties into the advice question, is just that mainstream news can tell you so much about what are Muslim women facing in New York, or what are Muslim women facing under Trump, or Muslims in general. But when you actually go and talk to people on the ground, it's so much more dynamic, and there's so much more to the experiences of individuals than what we get in the media. And I think this is so important because we're going through this period of struggle where there's all these protests and different things, and it's easy to get lost thinking that these giant communities of people think a specific thing, and then when you go and talk to them, you're like, oh, you think the exact opposite. And I'll give an example. I felt this when I was writing a story on Bay Ridge and how different groups of people in Bay Ridge were reacting to Trump, and they were organizing against Trump. And in the media, a lot of what it'll say is like, oh, people are saying, go to the polls, go to the polls, go to the polls, vote, right? And then a lot of people that I did interviews with and ended up writing about were saying, yeah, okay, the polls can get us so far, but actually, it's us organizing on the ground. It's the airport protests. It's, the bodega strike. This is what we need to be doing. And that's completely silenced and stomped on in the mainstream. And so I just think that that's one really important thing when you're choosing what to write about is to make sure that you don't use that as your starting point and instead just kind of enter a community like Humera was saying or Roja and see what people are saying and sort of build off of that.
And I would say, and just the fact that they do all kinds of writing here was really huge for me because I came to events and also saw people and they do fiction and poetry and nonfiction, and then they're also open to experimenting with different forms, which is what really opened my mind. I was like, oh, am I allowed to do that? And then after the first essay I wrote, and they said, Noel was like, yeah, you can keep going. And I kept saying, but isn't that cheating? I didn't do any reporting. I just feel like I'm just sitting down and writing out of my brain. I'm not doing any work. But yeah, so they kind of let me do that and through the events and all that. Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, Noel was a great editor. I mean, he was just, he
Thank you.
gave us the freedom and was really, really patient and ready to listen to us, give us the time, and also, of course, helped us bounce ideas. So it's been a very supportive environment.
Okay, so now we're ready to take questions from the floor. You have questions? Just say your name and that's it.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you feel like, I guess for your personal, each of you, for your personal trajectory or experiences in the past, who knows what the future holds. Do you feel like the process that you've undergone through this fellowship has in some significant way altered, for better or for worse, the way that you think about writing or the way you imagine approaching, the way you're going to endeavor to follow stories, approach things in the future?
I can just answer very quickly that because the fellowship was entitled, the title is the Muslim Communities Fellowship, I found myself, and I was drawn to women's stories, and I'm a woman, and I'm a Muslim woman, but I thought of myself as just a writer before that, but I found that I was thinking of myself now as a Muslim woman writer during the course of this fellowship, and I don't think it's just going to end with this fellowship. It's continuing to work on me creatively.
As someone who doesn't really identify with Islam, I thought it was interesting to even apply for the fellowship in the first place because, it's, in my experience, it's just, it hasn't really worked out for me, to be identified as such, or because, it seems like that makes you a bigger target of extremists. But that said, I think this fellowship was, really useful in helping me examine, in my own writing, why it's important to be part of that spectrum where there are people who are traditionally Muslim who identify with the religion, but there are others like me who don't fit in and have spent a lot of time not fitting in, and to be given the space not to fit in and still have that be valid was really helpful, and that makes me want to continue to be an advocate for just secular Islam, maybe even. Yeah.
So two of us were like that in this
I'm going to take off right where Rod actually ended. I think one important thing that I was constantly thinking about in the fellowship when I was deciding what to write about, and we didn't really talk about this too much in the fellowship, but there are also huge communities of people who are not Muslim, don't come from Muslim countries, but who are perceived as such, right? People who, yeah, like have no relation whatsoever to Islam, but who are perceived as Muslim and thus treated as such. And this is something I didn't explore, but I think like I would want to write more about. And if people here are applying to the fellowship, you should think about writing about this. But this just links to this, the greater question, which is like all these identities, Muslim and like Middle Eastern, and all of these identities that are cover just like a huge spectrum of people that are often reduced to like a tiny box that you check off on a paper, right, or one big umbrella. And I think that's one thing that we just like scratch the surface of, but that there's so much more to go into. I forgot your question. What was it? Oh, sorry. What we learned in the I think so. I just graduated college like a year ago, so I was like very new to all of this. But I think one thing that I really learned to do when I write, and I learned because of this fellowship, is to think about your audience and what you want them to get out of it. And I think that that's something that I was not equipped to do before this fellowship. And I think, like really honing your audience, like who it is and why are you writing what you're writing, are questions that are so important to think about, because then you end up just getting lost in what you're writing. And I think that the fellowship really helped me do that.
Okay, just a plug for the Muslim Communities Fellowship. We here at the Asian American Writers Workshop, we recognize the heterogeneity of the Muslim communities here in New York City. So the fellowship is actually open to emerging writers who will write about, actually emerging writers from Arab American, West Asian, Central Asian, Iranian, Afghan, East and North African, Black Muslim, South Asian, and Southeast Asian communities in New York City. Please note that the fellows, the applicants to the fellowship, need not be Asian American, but must be persons of color. So. Question? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Samira, and I'm a writer from Bangladesh. So it's great to see you, Rad. I actually have a question for Roja. I am someone who writes very much from my personal experiences, and I've always been curious to know how do you sort of balance the vulnerabilities of writing about families and family members, because that's in a way exposing them and they're in a lot of like their emotional nakedness, if you will. So how do you bring that to the front and then also hold it somewhat secret?
I don't think I really held much secret. I don't know. I think I just finally got the nerve to do it. That's really all it is. It's just been years and years of harboring these secret desires to write a book and to write narrative stories, but instead I was, it was good. I was much more in journalism and a reporter and an editor and this and this and that. And I just realized that this is the story, though. This is the one that works. And I just spent a lot of time not doing it. And I have a very supportive family who maybe I won't call out right now in this space, give them that much. So I was just also, once I wrote it, I had them read it. Every time it changed, I gave it to them again and again and again and asked them if it was okay and if they wanted anything changed. I changed it, although they didn't ask for much. So if they asked for more, maybe it would have been more of a debate. I don't know. But yeah, I don't think I'm saying anything bad.
Hi, I'm Kritika. My question is for Rad. Do you see a difference? Do you see a distinction between being Muslim and identifying with Islam?
Definitely.
So in that case, since you've said you don't identify with Islam, but your stories are about being Muslim in this environment. Is that an act of defiance for you?
It's not an act of defiance. It's actually playing into how the world sees me and trying to extrapolate on that and on that identity that like is already given to me. As soon as you see my name, it's already Muslim. There are assumptions made about me every time I enter an airport, every time I go into hospital or anything like that. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of voice to what it means to be identified as such, even though that's not how you identify yourself. Like, I mean, I can't remember the last time I prayed. I have no plans on ever fasting in my life or doing any of the basic things that I'm so proud of anyone who wants to go down that road, but it's just not my reality. But I think there is, it's definitely not an act of defiance. It is more of an act of expanding on the notion of what Islam means.
Hi, thank you. Okay, so I have a shout out and a question. So first, I just wanted to shout out my friend Mirna Haider, sitting right there. I don't know, Humera, if you know this, but Mirna was working with the group that you wrote your stories about for about a year, and one of the people who like made the foundation and really developed that group. So I just wanted to shout out the organizers of the people who put that together. And then my question is related to that. I think a couple of you, Sumaya, Humera, a couple of you guys mentioned that you interviewed people who had like really vulnerable stories, like a DACA recipient or these women in the Awal group. What was that experience like, especially with the silencing that we have in our community, and that is kind of like the issue that we have of getting the stories out? Like, how did you approach people? And I don't know if you guys know about Sarah's experience with the Matin Siraj Matin, but like, just what did you guys think about that? Just approaching people and how difficult that was.
I think it's really about building trust, and I can't, as much as I might want a story, I can't force a story out of someone. A lot of what came to me, I feel very lucky that I think there was just this wonderful sense of community and sisterhood, really, that we were all talking. They knew why I was there. They were told that I was a reporter and I was doing a story, but they wanted to share. And I think it's really about building that trust and then, of course, honoring that trust. And as long as you don't, of course, abuse it or manipulate it, the idea is to stay true to to their life story. But yes, I would say it's not always easy. And in this time of, you don't know, people within communities are telling on each other. So how do you trust someone who's come from outside? So I'm really very grateful, actually, to the Arab American Association of New York and their community, Awal and Arab of Union Women, who were so open with me. I'm really grateful.
That's a really good question, and there's so much to say. I think the most important thing, and Humera touched on this, is to make sure that you give them the space to tell the story, that you don't already know, like, oh, this is what I'm trying to get out of you, but you actually let them speak, and you sort of, you choose the questions that allow the most flexibility for the person to answer, and that way they're narrating their own story, and you're just kind of putting it into writing, as opposed to you have a narrative that you're extracting, and I think that's really important. And another thing is that I think there's something very powerful about the fact that, like, we are Muslim women writing about Muslim women, right? Like, it's not like a white man coming into this community being like, I want to write about you. And I think that the gap between getting the narrative wrong or misinterpreting things or imposing your own ideas or your own like preconceived notions of what identity is, that gap falls away. And so I think that that's very, very important. Another thing is just that, when I was writing my story on DACA, I made sure that I went back to the person I interviewed and showed them the story. And I know that that's something usually journalists don't do. But I mean, I think that in these cases it's very important because in the end, our goal is to really help the community that's affected and to get their stories out and not to just get a story that a lot of people are going to read.
I think we have more time for two more questions. Two more questions, please.
Hi, my name is Majdileen. I'm a writer that doesn't identify as one. But this question is actually for me personally. So I noticed a couple people had mentioned Trump and after Trump and their experiences. And so maybe some of the older people will argue, or I don't know, there are different arguments of whether it was harder or easier to be Muslim before Trump or after Trump, perceived or actual, right? Like people thought you were Muslim or whatever the case is. How do you feel that's impacted the way that you've written? Because I remember when I was an undergrad and wrote a story about Hamas, I was having a heart attack like the FBI is coming to me, what do I do? Versus like now I'm like, I could just say whatever the hell I want because NSA got all of this, right? And so it's like, I don't, like, how do you guys feel and how has that actually impacted your writing? Do you feel like it's been easier or harder? Has there been a shift? To me personally, I feel like it's the same, like nothing has changed since Shep came, just more out vocal, but I'm interested in hearing what you guys have to say.
Okay, I'll start. It's the first time I start. There's a lot to say, and that's a really good question. I think one thing for sure, and I'll just start with this, is that since Trump, you know, there's no doubt that millions of people have like radicalized, right? Like, millions of people who had before never gone to a protest, like never read or been into politics, who have started to do so, and I think that that's really important, and that is a huge shift. At the same time, that doesn't mean that the experiences of Muslims before and after Trump were different. Like, the reality is Obama was also in many ways just as bad as Trump, right? Like the drone wars, the fact that he deported more people than all of the presidents combined before George W. Like, Obama was not an angel. What Trump did was he like ramped up all of these policies, right? And as a result, because it was all happening at once, people were shaken and they responded. And so I think that what that means is that for me, when I was writing my stories, I was able to use the fact that people are riled up about Trump, that people are protesting, like the airport protests, which I mention a lot, to bring out these ideas in people and to draw them out and to understand like where that's coming from. But more importantly, how do we sustain it? So that people understand that after Trump, if we go back to an Obama-like person, it doesn't mean that our problems are solved. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers some of your questions.
I think one of the biggest differences that I've seen in the past 2 years is not necessarily, like Sumaya just pointed out, the climate towards Muslims, but changing, but moreover, how the media has responded. Not moreover. Sorry, I'm like kind of jumbled up today, but I think the response that I've been seeing from the media has been much more interesting. Because if I pitch an article today and I use secular Muslim in the subject line, woman also in the subject line, I will get a response from the editor, usually within an hour. And that has never happened before. So clearly there's more of an interest in understanding Islam, but that said, I think in my personal experience, 9/11 was a bigger problem because I've been checked at borders in over 87 airports, so airport encounters. So I think, I mean, just the surveillance itself and whatnot, that peaked and escalated after 9/11. So what we're seeing with Trump is, for me, a crystallization of something that has been happening in this country for the last, since 2001.
Okay, one last question.
Hi, my name is Sabrina, and my question is about, this is a fellowship that's open to like any Muslim, and it happened to be that 4 women were the fellows, and I'm curious about 5 women were the fellows, and I'm curious about like what that was like for all of you to be writing in community with each other as like 5 women covering your community.
Just start, but it was just wonderful. No, I mean, not that we would have had anything against having a man in our group, and we were all writing very different stories. But yeah, I think the gender within the group didn't matter. So, I mean, it's just a wonderful community, and I think we owe it to Asian American Writers Workshop and to Noel and the atmosphere and ethos of the workshop. But I think we also, yeah, it was just a very organic coming together.
Yeah, I mean, I feel as though I came in here like not knowing what to expect, and I know for a fact that I will be in touch with everyone in this group, and so I think like just piggybacking on everything you just said, I wouldn't have minded if there was a man in the group, but I'm also happy that we had the group that we had. I don't think gender really affected me in this.
I think what was nice was that there was just like a base understanding about certain things. So when we were coming up with ideas or talking about like the problems we're reaching, or maybe do I write about this, do I write about that? Because everyone had that base understanding, we were able to go a little bit deeper and a little bit farther in that idea, rather than getting stuck in like the nut graph and having to explain and have so much context that by the time we are done, you forgot your point. So I think that was really helpful, and also it gave me, anyways, the confidence to just write, you know, and think it might be valuable because I don't have to spend all this time. And then, you know, like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was really, really great. I think also just the fact that we were so different and we're like coming from such different experiences made it so wonderful. Like I really feel like, you know, I have 3 mentors to turn to when I have a question about writing or publishing or whatnot.
Every meeting is very productive, and I would say tiring because you have to be thinking on your feet every time that we meet, we discuss. But it's the kind of tiredness that you would always welcome. It's actually exhilarating. It's actually, you know, that it was a very productive meeting, but yeah. And they're all very assertive. So, and the thing is, we do from time to time, we have some differences of opinion, but the level of respect and the level of politeness, even up until the last moment, we could not agree on the title of this forum. So up until Friday night, we were discussing, but the back and forth actually was very, very productive, and eventually we agreed at the last minute on the title of this forum.
Yeah, I think I just want to make a small shout out to the Asian American Writers Workshop, because most places where you apply for like a fellowship or a writing thing, they impose so many restrictions on you, like about like how to write and what to write and how long and this and that. And here I was so surprised about this. You really are given the freedom to write about whatever you want and whatever framing you want it to be, however long you want it to be. And you'll find not just 1 or 2 people, but like a whole staff that is ready to work with you to make this project a reality. And so I think if anyone is here and like hasn't yet applied to be part of the Asian American Writers Workshop, like this is the time to do so. Don't wait until it's like so famous that do it now.
Okay, the next round of application for the Muslim Communities Fellowship is probably going to happen in April. The next round of the next batch of fellows would definitely, most probably would come in by July. We have current fellows right now actually. So we have Abir Kawas. We have Roshan Abraham. Roshan. Okay, so we have 7 fellows right now. We have Sarah Moawad. So they've just started their fellowship last month. So with that, please let's all thank all our speakers, our writers who gave us their time tonight to read their stories and to discuss their stories and their experiences as writers writing about the Muslim American community. So let's all give them a round of applause.